The scissors gleamed under the fluorescent lights as Instructor Volkov grabbed a fistful of Irene Hill's dark hair. The entire training hall fell silent. This was meant to be her ultimate humiliation, the final proof that she didn't belong in the European Intelligence Academy. But as the first locks fell to the floor, something impossible appeared on the newly exposed skin of her neck, a marking that shouldn't exist, written in ink that only appeared under specific conditions. Volkov's hand froze mid-cut. The girl he'd been trying to break for 6 months, the one he'd called weak and emotional, the one he dismissed as the Academy's biggest mistake, was standing there with the identification mark of Phantom, the legendary operative everyone thought was a myth. This is the story of how one act of cruelty revealed the truth that would change everything. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out, subscribe now for more. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of the European Intelligence Academy in Prague as Irene Hill completed her 200th push-up. Her arms trembled, sweat dripped from her forehead onto the cold stone beneath her, but she didn't stop. Around her, the other recruits had finished their morning physical training 30 minutes ago and were already heading to breakfast. But Irene wasn't allowed to stop. Not yet. 201, she counted through gritted teeth. 202. Instructor Volkov stood 10 feet away, his arms crossed over his barrel chest, his expression one of cold satisfaction. He'd been watching her for the past hour, occasionally checking his watch, making notes in his ever-present black notebook. At 47, Volkov was a legend at the Academy, a former field operative who'd served in operations across 3 continents. His approval could make a career. His disapproval could end one before it started. 215, Irene gasped, her form beginning to deteriorate. Stop! Volkov's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Irene collapsed onto the stone, her chest heaving, her entire body screaming. She'd been at the Academy for 6 months, and every single day had been a battle. Not against the curriculum, not against the physical demands, but against the systematic dismissal of her capabilities by the man who now stood over her like a judge pronouncing sentence. On your feet, Hill. Irene pushed herself up, swaying slightly as blood rushed from her head. She was 23 years old, stood 5'4", and weighed barely 50 kilograms. Everything about her appearance suggested fragility, delicate features, large dark eyes that seemed perpetually on the verge of tears, and a slender frame that looked like it might snap under pressure. In an institution designed to forge spies and operatives capable of withstanding torture and infiltrating hostile territories, Irene Hill looked like someone who'd wandered in by mistake. Do you know why I kept you out here, Hill? Volkov asked, circling her slowly. No, sir. Because you're weak. He said the word with clinical precision, as if diagnosing a medical condition. Physically weak, emotionally weak, mentally weak. You cry during interrogation resistance training. You hesitate during combat simulations. You form emotional attachments to your training partners instead of viewing them as assets to be utilized. Irene said nothing. She'd learned that arguing only made things worse. The European Intelligence Academy accepts 20 recruits per year from a pool of over 5,000 applicants, Volkov continued. Do you know how many recruits we've dismissed in the past 5 years for emotional instability? No, sir. 7. And do you know what all 7 had in common? He stopped directly in front of her, his ice blue eyes boring into hers. They all reminded me of you. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Irene had known since her first week that Volkov considered her a mistake, an administrative error that had somehow slipped through the rigorous selection process. But hearing it stated so baldly, so publicly, brought a familiar burning sensation to her eyes. Don't you dare, Volkov said softly, noticing the moisture gathering. Don't you dare cry in front of me again. Irene blinked rapidly, forcing the tears back through sheer willpower. This was her greatest weakness and her most hated trait. She felt everything too intensely, fear, anger, frustration, compassion. In a profession that required emotional control and calculated detachment, her inability to separate feeling from function marked her as fundamentally unsuited for intelligence work. Report to hand-to-hand combat training, Volkov said, turning away. Try not to embarrass yourself more than usual. As Irene walked toward the training complex, she felt the familiar weight of eyes on her back. The other recruits watched her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was the academy's running joke, the girl who somehow kept passing written exams and technical assessments while failing every practical evaluation that mattered. The combat training hall was a cavernous space with padded floors and walls lined with various training equipment. Irene arrived to find her cohort already paired up for sparring exercises. Instructor Davidson, a compact woman with the build of a gymnast and the scarred knuckles of a street fighter, gestured for Irene to join the group. Hill, you're with Kozlov. Irene's stomach sank. Kozlov was a mountain of a man, a former Russian military officer who stood 6'3" and outweighed her by at least 50 kilograms. He wasn't cruel like some of the other recruits, but he didn't pull his punches either. In their training environment, showing mercy was considered a greater insult than aggression. They bowed to each other and assumed fighting stances. Irene had been studying martial arts since she was 12, had trained in 3 different disciplines, and could execute techniques with textbook precision. But in practical application against larger, stronger opponents, her technical skill often proved insufficient. Kozlov came at her with a straight right punch. Irene slipped it, countered with a palm strike to his ribs, and attempted a leg sweep. Kozlov barely moved, his weight and stance too solid for her technique to displace. His return combination came fast: jab, cross, hook. Irene blocked the first 2, but the hook caught her on the side of the head, sending her stumbling. Reset, Davidson called. They went again. And again. Each round followed the same pattern. Irene would display technically superior skills, would execute counters and combinations that would work perfectly against someone her own size, but Kozlov's sheer physical advantage eventually overwhelmed her defenses. After the 7th round, Irene found herself on her back, Kozlov's forearm pressed against her throat in a chokehold she couldn't escape. She tapped out, and he released her immediately, offering a hand to help her up. You're getting better, Kozlov said quietly as they reset. Your technique is excellent. Technique doesn't matter if I can't finish, Irene replied, frustration evident in her voice. It matters, Kozlov insisted. You just need to find a way to use it that accounts for the size difference. Before Irene could respond, Volkov's voice echoed across the training hall. Hill. My office. Now. The training hall fell silent. Being called to Volkov's office was rarely a good sign. Irene exchanged a quick glance with Kozlov, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, then followed the instructor out of the hall. Volkov's office was located in the administrative wing of the academy, a space that felt more like an interrogation room than a place of learning. Gray walls, minimal furniture, and a single window that looked out onto the inner courtyard where Irene had spent her morning doing push-ups. Sit, Volkov commanded, taking his position behind the desk. Irene sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Volkov opened a file, one that Irene recognized as her training record. Your written examination scores are exceptional. Top 5% in intelligence analysis, cryptography, and foreign language proficiency. Your technical skills in surveillance equipment and cyber operations are above average. He looked up from the file. And yet, in every practical field exercise, you fail to meet minimum standards. I'm working to improve, sir. Are you? Volkov leaned back in his chair. Because from where I sit, you're wasting academy resources that could be better spent on recruits with actual potential. You pass written tests because you're good at memorizing information. But intelligence work isn't about what you know, Hill. It's about what you can do when everything goes wrong, when you're alone in hostile territory with no backup and no way out. It's about being hard enough, strong enough, ruthless enough to make the choices that will haunt you for the rest of your life. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. I've been reviewing your file extensively. Your psychological evaluation flagged you for emotional volatility. Your combat scores place you in the bottom 10th percentile. Your field exercise performance has been described by multiple instructors as hesitant, overthinking, and compromised by excessive empathy. Volkov closed the file with deliberate finality. I'm recommending your dismissal from the academy, effective immediately. The words hit Irene like a physical blow. 6 months of grueling training, of pushing herself past every limit, of enduring dismissal and doubt, all for nothing. But beneath the crushing disappointment, something else stirred. Anger. Pure, burning anger at the unfairness of it all. With respect, sir, you haven't given me a fair chance, Irene said, her voice shaking not with tears but with barely controlled fury. You decided I was unsuitable on my first day and have spent 6 months trying to prove yourself right instead of actually training me. Volkov's expression darkened. Excuse me? Every other recruit receives constructive feedback. I receive criticism designed to break me down. Every other recruit is given opportunities to demonstrate their strengths. I'm only evaluated on my weaknesses. Irene stood, her hands trembling. You want me to fail because I don't fit your image of what an operative should be. Sit down, Hill. No, sir. If you're dismissing me anyway, then I'm going to say what I should have said months ago. You're a bully who mistakes cruelty for strength. And you're wrong about me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Volkov stood slowly, his face a mask of cold rage. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. I tried to do this the professional way, Hill. I tried to give you the dignity of a private dismissal. But since you've decided to challenge my authority, we'll do this differently. He walked to the door and opened it. In the hallway stood 2 academy security officers. Escort Hill to the assembly hall. Alert all instructors and recruits. We're having an emergency formation in 15 minutes. Irene's anger drained away, replaced by cold dread. Emergency formations were rare, usually reserved for major disciplinary issues or important announcements. Whatever Volkov was planning, it would be public and humiliating. The assembly hall was the academy's largest space, capable of holding all 200 recruits and the full instructor staff. As Irene was led to the front of the room, she watched her fellow recruits file in, their expressions ranging from curious to sympathetic. Kozlov caught her eye and mouthed, "Stay strong." Volkov stood at the podium, waiting until every seat was filled before beginning. We are gathered here today to address a fundamental issue that threatens the integrity of this institution. The European Intelligence Academy maintains the highest standards in the world because we refuse to compromise on the qualities that make an effective operative. We do not graduate agents who will crack under pressure. We do not certify operatives who allow emotion to override judgment. And we do not tolerate recruits who challenge the authority of their instructors. He gestured toward Irene, standing alone at the front of the hall. Hill has demonstrated, repeatedly, that she lacks the fundamental characteristics necessary for intelligence work. More troubling, she has just attempted to deflect responsibility for her failures by accusing me of bias and unprofessional conduct. Murmurs rippled through the assembled recruits. Irene felt 200 pairs of eyes on her, judging, assessing, finding her wanting. In my 20 years as an instructor, I have seen many recruits struggle with the demands of this program. But I have never seen such a fundamental disconnect between a recruit's self-perception and reality. Volkov's voice took on almost theatrical quality. Hill believes she deserves to be here. She believes that her written test scores and technical knowledge compensate for her inability to function in the field. She believes that passion and determination can replace the physical and psychological strength this profession demands. Volkov walked down from the podium, circling Irene like a predator assessing prey. Let me tell you what I see when I look at Hill. I see someone who cries during stress inoculation training. I see someone who hesitates to make hard choices in tactical simulations because she's too concerned about theoretical casualties. I see someone who forms emotional bonds with training partners, which will inevitably compromise operational security in the field. He stopped directly in front of her. But most of all, I see someone who is desperately trying to be something she's not. And that desperation, that refusal to accept reality, makes her dangerous. Not to our enemies, but to the operatives who might someday depend on her. Irene kept her gaze fixed on the back wall, refusing to give Volkov the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside, each word landed like a hammer blow. Because part of her, the part she tried hardest to silence, wondered if he was right. In traditional military academies, there are rituals for marking failure, Volkov continued. Public demonstrations that serve as warnings to others and as acknowledgement that some people simply don't have what it takes. He produced a pair of scissors from his pocket, the metal gleaming under the assembly hall's lights. Hill has maintained regulation-length hair throughout her time here. Hair that she spends considerable time managing each morning. Hair that represents her clinging to civilian vanity in an environment that demands absolute practicality. Irene's stomach dropped as she realized what was coming. Around the hall, recruits shifted uncomfortably. Even the other instructors looked uncertain. This was crossing a line that no one had expected. As your final lesson at this academy, Hill, you will learn what it means to let go of the things that don't matter. Volkov grabbed a handful of her dark hair, which fell past her shoulders in waves she'd carefully braided that morning. You will learn that appearance means nothing. Comfort means nothing. Pride means nothing. Sir, this is unnecessary, Instructor Davidson spoke up from the side of the hall. If you're dismissing her, just dismiss her. This is not your concern, Davidson, Volkov snapped. Then, to Irene, you can make this easy or difficult, Hill. Either way, this is happening. Irene had a choice. She could fight, could struggle, could make a scene that would only confirm every negative thing Volkov had said about her emotional instability. Or she could endure this final humiliation with whatever dignity she could muster. She chose dignity. Do what you're going to do, she said quietly. Volkov's scissors bit through her hair with harsh, irregular cuts. He wasn't trying to give her a proper haircut, he was mutilating it, leaving jagged patches and uneven lengths. Hair fell around her feet in dark cascades. Some recruits looked away. Others watched with morbid fascination. The only sound in the massive hall was the snip of scissors and Irene's controlled breathing. As Volkov worked his way around her head, cutting away the hair at the base of her skull, something unexpected happened. He paused. The scissors clattered to the floor. What is that? Volkov's voice had changed, the theatrical cruelty replaced by genuine shock. Irene couldn't see what he was looking at, but she felt his fingers on the back of her neck, touching the newly exposed skin with surprising gentleness. Around the hall, instructors began standing, moving closer to see what had caused Volkov's reaction. Instructor Davidson reached them first. Her sharp intake of breath was audible in the silent hall. That's not possible, she whispered. Someone get Director Petrov, Volkov ordered, his voice tight. Now. The marking on Irene's neck was small, barely the size of a coin, positioned precisely at the base of her skull where hair would normally cover it. To the untrained eye, it might look like a birthmark or an old scar. But to anyone with intelligence training, it was unmistakable, a phoenix in flight, rendered in what appeared to be ultraviolet reactive ink that only became visible under certain lighting conditions or when exposed after being covered for extended periods. Director Petrov arrived within minutes, his usually composed face showing rare emotion. He was a legend in European intelligence circles, a man who'd run operations in every major conflict zone for the past 3 decades. He took one look at Irene's neck and immediately ordered the hall cleared of all recruits. Everyone out except senior instructors, Petrov commanded. This is now a classified matter. The recruits filed out in confused silence, though Irene caught Kozlov's bewildered expression as he passed. Within moments, only Petrov, Volkov, Davidson, and 3 other senior instructors remained. How long has this been there? Petrov asked Irene, his voice carefully neutral. I don't know what you're talking about, sir, Irene replied honestly. I can't see my own neck. Davidson produced her phone and took a photograph, then showed it to Irene. The marking was clear in the image, the phoenix symbol precise and deliberately placed. But Irene had never seen it before, had no memory of receiving such a marking. That's not possible, Irene said. I've never had a tattoo. I would remember something like that. It's not a tattoo, Petrov said grimly. It's a designation mark used by a single operative in European intelligence history. An operative we believed was either dead or had never existed at all. He looked at Volkov, who had gone pale. You just cut the hair of someone marked as Phantom. The name hung in the air like smoke. Irene had heard whispers of Phantom during her intelligence history classes. A legendary operative who'd allegedly run solo operations throughout Eastern Europe in the 1990s and early 2000s. Someone who'd accomplished missions considered impossible, who'd extracted assets from situations with zero survival probability, who'd operated without backup or official acknowledgement. Most instructors treated Phantom as mythology, a composite of multiple successful operations attributed to a single fictional operative to boost morale. Phantom is a training legend, Volkov said, but his voice lacked conviction. A story we tell recruits to illustrate theoretical operational excellence. Phantom was real, Petrov replied. I know because I was Phantom's handler for 6 years before the operative disappeared in 2008. And this mark, he gestured to Irene's neck, was how Phantom could be identified if extraction or verification was ever necessary. The ink reacts to prolonged coverage in specific environmental conditions. It's designed to remain invisible under normal circumstances but become visible when needed. That's impossible, Irene protested. I was 14 years old in 2008. I was living in London with my parents. I've never run operations. I've never even left Western Europe until I came to this academy. Petrov studied her with an intensity that made Irene feel like every secret she'd ever had was being laid bare. Tell me about your parents, Hill. Your real parents. The question hit Irene like ice water. My real parents? I don't understand, sir. My parents are William and Catherine Hill. My father is a banker, my mother is a university professor. They live in London. And before London? Petrov pressed. I don't remember before London. We moved there when I was very young. Even as she said it, Irene felt something shift in her memory, like trying to recall a dream that slipped away upon waking. She'd never questioned her childhood before, had never found it strange that her earliest clear memories only began around age 7 or 8. Petrov exchanged glances with the other senior instructors. I need to make some calls. Volkov, Davidson, keep Hill here. No one talks to her, no one asks her questions until I return. Is that understood? After Petrov left, an uncomfortable silence filled the assembly hall. Volkov stood apart from the others, his earlier confidence shattered. Davidson approached Irene with a water bottle. Drink something, she said quietly. Whatever's happening here, you need to stay hydrated. Irene took the water gratefully, her hands shaking as she raised the bottle to her lips. The jagged remains of her hair fell across her face, a physical reminder of her humiliation. Except now that humiliation had transformed into something else entirely, something she didn't understand. I need a mirror, Irene said suddenly. A real mirror, not a phone photo. I need to see this mark properly. Davidson hesitated, then gestured toward the instructor's facilities attached to the assembly hall. There's a full mirror in the changing room. I'll come with you. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the changing room, Irene stood with her back to the mirror, using a hand mirror to see the marking clearly. The phoenix was rendered in exquisite detail despite its small size, its wings spread in flight, its tail feathers flowing behind it. But what caught Irene's attention was something else. Beneath the phoenix, in script so tiny she had to squint to read it, were numbers. A date. July 15, 2008. July 15, 2008. Irene would have been 14 years old. She closed her eyes and tried to remember anything from that summer, but encountered only fragments: a hospital room, the smell of antiseptic, her mother's worried face, doctors speaking in hushed tones. She'd been told she'd had a severe illness, had spent weeks recovering. But the details had always been vague. What do you remember from when you were 14? Davidson asked gently. I was sick, Irene replied. At least, that's what my parents told me. I missed most of the summer. When I went back to school in the fall, I'd forgotten some things. Small things. Friends' names, classroom locations. Everyone said it was because of the illness. What kind of illness? They never told me exactly. Just that it affected my memory, that I needed rest and recovery. Irene turned to face Davidson directly. But that's not true, is it? Something else happened to me that summer. Before Davidson could respond, Petrov returned with two people Irene didn't recognize, a stern woman in her 50s carrying a medical bag and a younger man with the bearing of military intelligence. Hill, this is Dr. Rice and Agent Thorne, Petrov introduced them. Dr. Rice specializes in memory reconstruction. Agent Thorne is from the Classified Operations Review Board. They're here to help us understand what happened to you. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. Dr. Rice set up her equipment in a private conference room, transforming the space into an impromptu medical facility. Irene sat in a chair at the center, electrodes attached to her temples, while various monitors displayed readings she didn't understand. Memory suppression is a delicate process, Dr. Rice explained as she worked. It's not like what you see in films, where someone snaps their fingers and memories disappear. Real memory work involves careful biochemical intervention combined with psychological conditioning. The goal is to create a seamless narrative that the subject accepts without question. You're saying someone deliberately erased my memories? Irene asked, trying to process the implications. I'm saying that's one possibility we need to explore. Dr. Rice adjusted her equipment. The Phantom Protocol was one of the most classified programs in European intelligence history. If you were part of that program as a child, then yes, your memories would have been carefully managed. Agent Thorne stood against the wall, his expression unreadable. The Phantom program was shut down in 2008 amid ethical concerns. It involved training operatives from childhood, creating agents with no conventional identity or past that could be compromised. The program produced exceptional results, but the moral cost was considered too high. "You're talking about me like I'm a weapon that was built," Irene said, anger creeping into her voice. "That's exactly what the program did," Thorne replied bluntly. "It took children with specific psychological profiles and exceptional abilities, then trained them to become operatives before they were old enough to consent. When the program was terminated, all subjects were supposed to be deprogrammed and given normal lives." Supposed to be? We thought all subjects had been successfully transitioned. Given new identities, false memories, adopted by handlers who would ensure they lived normal civilian lives. Thorne moved closer, studying her. "But if you're marked as phantom, then either the deprogramming failed, or you were never deprogrammed at all." Dr. Rice interrupted. "I'm going to use a combination of hypnotic regression and targeted questioning to see if we can access suppressed memories. This may be uncomfortable, Irene. Are you willing to proceed?" Irene looked around the room at the faces watching her. Petrov, grave and concerned. Davidson, sympathetic but professional. Volkov, standing in the corner, looking like his entire worldview had collapsed. And Thorne, clinical and detached, viewing her as a puzzle to be solved. "I want to know the truth," Irene said. "Whatever it is." The regression process took over an hour. Dr. Rice guided Irene through relaxation techniques, then began asking questions designed to access memories from before her supposed illness. At first, Irene encountered only the familiar blanks, the vague impressions that had always characterized her early childhood. But as Dr. Rice persisted, something began to shift. "Tell me about the summer you were 14, Dr. Rice said, her voice low and soothing. "Not what you were told happened, but what you actually remember." Images flashed through Irene's mind. A facility that wasn't a hospital. Training rooms disguised as therapy spaces. A woman with kind eyes who taught her things that had nothing to do with recovery. Languages. Combat techniques. Surveillance methods. All presented as games, as rehabilitation exercises. "I remember learning Russian," Irene said slowly, her eyes still closed. "But I was told I already knew Russian, that I'd forgotten it because of my illness. The woman said we were just refreshing my memory." "What else?" "There were others. Other children. We had sessions together, but we never talked about anything real. We played scenarios, acted out situations. It felt like theater class, but intensive. Hours every day." Irene's breathing quickened. "There was a man who evaluated us. He had cold eyes. He said some of us would graduate, and some of us would be recycled. I was terrified of being recycled. Do you know what that meant?" "No. I just knew it was bad. Something to avoid." Irene's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. "I was good at the scenarios. Better than most of the others. The woman with kind eyes said I had natural talent, that I processed emotional information differently than normal people. She said it was a gift." Dr. Rice continued the questioning, carefully excavating memories that had been buried for 9 years. With each revelation, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. Irene hadn't been sick that summer. She'd been in the final phase of phantom training, preparing for field deployment. But something had gone wrong. "There was an incident," Irene said, her voice taking on a distant quality. "During a training exercise. We were supposed to infiltrate a mock facility, retrieve information without being detected. I was paired with another trainee, a boy named Victor. He was older, more experienced. But he made a mistake, triggered an alarm. What happened? I could have escaped. Should have escaped. That was the protocol. If your partner is compromised, you abandon them and complete the mission. But Victor was hurt. He'd fallen during the alarm response, broken his leg. I couldn't leave him." Irene's eyes opened, filled with tears that finally fell. "I went back for him. I got him out, but it meant failing the mission. Agent Thorne leaned forward, his professional detachment cracking slightly. The Phantom program didn't tolerate that kind of emotional decision-making. Operatives who showed too much empathy were considered security risks. They were going to recycle me, Irene continued. But the woman with kind eyes argued for a different approach. She said my empathy wasn't a weakness if it was properly managed. She convinced them to try a modified protocol. She touched the back of her neck, where the phoenix marking lay hidden beneath her butchered hair. This mark was her insurance policy. She told me it would protect me, that if I ever needed help, it would prove who I was. Who is she? Petrov asked. This woman who protected you. Irene closed her eyes again, searching through recovered memories. Eva. That's what we called her. I never knew her last name. She ran the emotional conditioning program, the part that was supposed to make us effective operatives without being sociopaths. Petrov's face went white. Eva Brenner. She was killed in 2009, supposedly in a car accident. But intelligence suggested it wasn't an accident at all. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that was both incredible and terrifying. Eva Brenner had been one of the architects of the Phantom program, but had grown concerned about its ethical implications. When the program was shut down, she'd fought to ensure the child operatives received proper deprogramming and placement. But she'd also kept insurance, ways to identify and protect her former students if something went wrong. The marking on your neck is encoded with information, Thorne explained. Under the right analysis, it contains an identification number, training completion date, and classification level. You weren't just any Phantom trainee, Irene. You completed the full program. You were certified as a field operative at 14 years old. But I don't remember any of that, Irene protested. I don't have those skills. If I'd really been trained as a child operative, wouldn't I be better at everything here? Wouldn't I excel at combat and field exercises instead of failing them? Dr. Rice had an answer. Memory suppression doesn't eliminate skills, but it can disconnect them from conscious access. Your training is still there, buried beneath the false memories of a normal childhood. But without the context, without knowing how to access those skills deliberately, they only emerge in specific circumstances. What kind of circumstances? High-stress situations. Moments when your subconscious determines that survival requires capabilities beyond your supposed civilian training. Dr. Rice showed Irene data from the monitoring equipment. During our session, when you recalled the incident with Victor, your stress hormones spiked. In response, your neural patterns shifted. For approximately 30 seconds, you displayed reaction times and situational awareness consistent with advanced operative training. Irene stared at the data, trying to comprehend what it meant. All her life, she'd felt like she was performing a role, playing at being someone she wasn't quite comfortable being. Now she understood why. The person she thought she was had been constructed, a cover story so thorough that even she believed it. So what happens now? Irene asked. Do you put me back under, make me forget this too? That's not our decision, Petrov said. But personally, I think you've been lied to enough. You deserve to know who you really are. The conference room had become a makeshift operations center as more personnel arrived. Files were spread across tables, digital displays showed classified documents, and the full scope of the Phantom program was gradually revealed. Irene sat at the center of it all, learning about a life she'd lived but couldn't remember. There were 12 children in the final Phantom cohort, Agent Thorne explained, displaying photographs on screen. All between ages 12 and 15. All selected for exceptional cognitive abilities and specific psychological profiles. The program's goal was to create operatives who could blend into any environment, who would be overlooked because of their age and appearance, but who possessed skills rivaling the best adult agents. Irene studied the photographs. She recognized some faces, though she couldn't attach names to them. Children who looked ordinary, unremarkable. Exactly the point. Of the 12, 9 were successfully deprogrammed after the program shut down. They're living normal lives now, unaware of their training. 2 died during the transition process, complications from the memory suppression protocols. Thorne paused. And one disappeared from records entirely. That was you. Why me? Why was I different? Eva Brenner's notes suggest she believed you were special, Petrov said, pulling up documents. Not because you were the most skilled or the most capable, but because you maintained emotional capacity despite the training. Most phantom operatives became detached, clinical. You somehow retained empathy while developing operational excellence. Eva thought that combination could revolutionize intelligence work. But the program directors disagreed, Thorne continued. They saw your empathy as a critical flaw. When you chose to rescue Victor instead of completing the mission, they ordered your immediate recycling. What does that actually mean? Recycling? Irene wasn't sure she wanted to know, but she needed to understand. Dr. Rice answered, her voice heavy. Permanent memory suppression followed by institutionalization. The subjects were given identities as mentally disabled individuals and placed in care facilities where they could be monitored but would never pose a security risk. It was considered more humane than termination. The casual way she said termination made Irene's blood run cold. These people had debated whether to erase her mind or simply kill her, and she'd been 14 years old. Eva Brenner prevented that, Petrov said. She falsified reports suggesting you'd already been successfully deprogrammed. She personally arranged your placement with the Hill family, intelligence assets who believed they were simply adopting a troubled child from a classified program. She gave you the best chance at a normal life she could manage. Then why apply to the Intelligence Academy? Davidson asked the question everyone was wondering. If you were given a chance at normalcy, why come back to this world? Irene thought about that question, reaching past the false memories to something deeper. I don't think I chose to come here. I think part of me, the part that remembers the training, drove me toward it. My parents didn't want me to apply. They tried to discourage me. But I felt pulled here, like I was supposed to be here. Subconscious programming, Dr. Rice confirmed. Part of your original training included directives that would activate under certain conditions. Reaching young adulthood might have triggered a return-to-service protocol. The implications were staggering. Irene hadn't chosen her path. She'd been programmed to follow it, even when her conscious mind thought it was making independent decisions. Every choice that led her to this academy had been influenced by conditioning she didn't know existed. I need to talk to my parents, Irene said suddenly. My real parents, William and Catherine Hill. They need to explain what they knew, what they were told. They're already on their way, Petrov said. I contacted them 2 hours ago. They'll be here by morning. Volkov, who had been silent throughout the revelations, finally spoke. I owe you an apology, Hill. I spent 6 months trying to break someone who was already broken and rebuilt. Every criticism I made, every judgment about your emotional responses, I was wrong about all of it. Irene looked at him, at the man who'd humiliated her, who'd cut her hair to mark her failure. You weren't entirely wrong. I am emotional. I do hesitate. I do care too much about people. But maybe that's not a weakness. Maybe Eva Brenner was right, and empathy is what separates good operatives from monsters. Night had fallen over the academy by the time the immediate crisis settled into uncomfortable waiting. Irene was given quarters in the secure wing, a small room with a bed, desk, and window that looked out over the Prague skyline. She should have been exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. She stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. The jagged haircut Volkov had given her looked even worse now, uneven chunks that would take months to grow out properly. But beneath the ruined hair, at the base of her skull, was the phoenix marking. Her proof of a life she couldn't remember, of training that had made her into something she didn't understand. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Kozlov standing in the hallway, looking uncertain. I heard some of what happened, he said. I don't understand most of it, but I wanted to check if you were okay. I don't know if I am, Irene admitted. I don't know what I am anymore. Kozlov stepped into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. You're the same person you were this morning. You're still the recruit who outscores everyone on written exams. You're still the one who gets knocked down in combat training but always gets back up. Finding out about your past doesn't change who you've become. Doesn't it? What if everything I think about myself is a lie? What if my personality, my values, my emotions, what if they're all just programming? Then the programming created someone worth knowing, Kozlov said simply. Someone who cares about doing the right thing even when it costs her. Someone who stands up to authority when she believes in something. That's not programming, Irene. That's character. The use of her first name, something recruits rarely did with each other, felt significant. Like an acknowledgement that the formal distance of training was inadequate for what she was experiencing. Volkov was wrong about you, Kozlov continued. We all were. But maybe we were wrong in a different way than we thought. We saw your emotions as weakness because that's what we're taught here. But what if emotions are actually a different kind of strength? What if caring about people makes you better at protecting them? Before Irene could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Davidson, accompanied by two people Irene recognized instantly despite not having seen them in months. William and Irene Hill stood in the hallway, their faces showing the strain of emergency travel and emotional turmoil. We'll give you privacy, Davidson said, ushering Kozlov out. Irene faced the people she'd called mother and father for 9 years. Catherine moved first, pulling Irene into a tight embrace. William followed, his arms wrapping around both of them. For a moment, they simply held each other, a family unit built on foundations Irene now knew were partly false. When they finally separated, Catherine's eyes were red from crying. We wanted to tell you. Every birthday, every milestone, we wanted to explain the truth. But we were told that revealing anything about your past could trigger psychological collapse. We were supposed to protect you by keeping you ignorant. Tell me everything, Irene said. I need to know who I really am. They sat together, and William began the story. We were intelligence assets, handlers who managed operatives in the field. When Eva Brenner approached us about taking in a child from a classified program, we agreed because we trusted her judgment. She told us you'd been through trauma, that you needed stability and love and a chance at normalcy. She didn't tell you I was a trained operative? Not exactly, Catherine said. She said you had unique capabilities that needed to be carefully managed. She warned us that you might display unusual skills or knowledge, that we should never acknowledge it or ask questions. Our job was to help you believe in your own normalcy. And it worked, Irene said bitterly. I believed I was ordinary. Weak. Unsuited for this life. You're not weak, William insisted. You're the strongest person we know. You survived a childhood that would have destroyed most people, then built a life on top of suppressed trauma and hidden capabilities. The fact that you became who you are, someone empathetic and caring despite everything, that's extraordinary. Catherine reached out and gently touched the back of Irene's neck, where the phoenix marking lay. Eva told me about this mark. She said it was her promise to you, that she'd never forget what you'd endured. She said the phoenix represented rebirth, that you'd been given a chance to rise from the ashes of the program into something better. But I came back, Irene said. I chose this life again. Maybe part of you needed to, William suggested. Maybe you needed to prove that you could succeed in this world on your own terms, not as a program child operative but as someone making conscious choices. The next morning brought a formal meeting with the Academy's senior leadership. Irene sat across from a panel of 5 directors, including Petrov, while her parents waited outside. The room felt less like a disciplinary hearing and more like a strategic planning session, which somehow made it more unnerving. We have a unique situation, Director Petrov began. You're a graduate of the Phantom program, which technically makes you a certified operative despite having no conscious memory of that training. You're also a current Academy recruit who, until yesterday, was being recommended for dismissal due to performance concerns. The question is what we do now, another director added. We could complete your deprogramming, ensure all Phantom conditioning is permanently suppressed, and release you to civilian life. That would be the safest option for everyone involved. Or Irene asked, sensing there was another possibility. Or we acknowledge that you represent something unprecedented, Petrov said. An operative with full phantom training who also possesses genuine emotional capacity and moral reasoning. Eva Brenner believed that combination could revolutionize intelligence work. Perhaps it's time we tested that theory. You want to activate me? Irene felt her pulse quicken. Use me as an operative? We want to give you a choice, Petrov corrected. Something you never had as a child. You can walk away from this life completely, or you can stay at the academy and complete your training with full knowledge of your capabilities. But this time, you'd be in control. No hidden programming, no suppressed memories. Just you, choosing who you want to be. Irene looked around the room at the faces watching her. These were people who'd spent careers in intelligence work, who understood the costs and consequences of this life. They were offering her a choice, but it was a choice weighted with enormous implications. If I stay, what changes? Everything, Petrov replied. We'd work with Dr. Rice to safely unlock your phantom training, integrating those skills with your conscious awareness. You'd continue academy coursework, but with specialized instruction that accounts for your unique background. And most importantly, you'd help us develop new training protocols that balance operational effectiveness with ethical considerations. I'd become a test case. You'd become a pioneer, Petrov said. The first operative trained to use empathy as a tactical advantage rather than treating it as a liability to be suppressed. Instructor Davidson, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. I've reviewed your complete record, Hill. Your technical scores are exceptional. Your tactical thinking is sophisticated. The only area where you've struggled is in scenarios that require you to ignore human costs in favor of mission success. We've been training you to become something you're not. Maybe instead we should train you to become what you actually are. And what's that? Someone who completes the mission without losing her humanity in the process, Davidson replied. Someone who proves that caring about people doesn't make you weak, it makes you strategic. Because at the end of the day, intelligence work is about people. Understanding them, protecting them, sometimes manipulating them. You can't do any of that effectively if you've trained yourself not to care. Irene thought about the past 6 months, about every moment she'd felt inadequate, every time she'd been dismissed as too emotional or too weak. She thought about Volkov cutting her hair, intending to humiliate her, inadvertently revealing the truth that changed everything. And she thought about Victor, the boy from her suppressed memories whom she'd risked everything to save. I want to stay, Irene said. But on one condition. Instructor Volkov remains as one of my training supervisors. The directors exchanged surprised glances. Given his treatment of you, we assumed you'd want him removed from any role in your training. He pushed me harder than anyone else, Irene explained. He was wrong about why I struggled, but he was right that I needed to be tested. I don't want special treatment now. I want to prove that I can meet the same standards as everyone else, but do it without sacrificing the things that make me who I am. And having Volkov watch me succeed at that seems like appropriate closure. Petrov smiled slightly. You're more forgiving than I'd be in your position. It's not forgiveness, Irene said. It's pragmatism. Volkov knows my weaknesses better than anyone. If I can satisfy his standards while staying true to myself, then I'll know I've actually succeeded. The directors conferred briefly, then Petrov delivered their decision. Welcome back to the academy, Recruit Hill. Or should I say, welcome for the first time with full knowledge of who you are. We'll begin the integration process immediately. 3 months later, Irene stood in the same assembly hall where Volkov had cut her hair and accidentally revealed her identity. But everything was different now. Her hair had grown back enough to style properly, though she kept it shorter than before, practical rather than decorative. The phoenix marking on her neck was visible when she wanted it to be, a reminder of her past and a symbol of her choice to embrace it. She was addressing the new class of recruits, sharing her story as part of their orientation. The academy had decided that her experience offered valuable lessons about assumptions, potential, and the different forms strength could take. 6 months ago, I stood in this hall as an example of failure, Irene told the assembled recruits. My instructor cut my hair to humiliate me, to demonstrate that some people don't belong in intelligence work. But in doing so, he revealed something neither of us knew. I'd been trained as a child operative, then had those memories suppressed to give me a chance at a normal life. She saw the recruits' faces showing mixtures of fascination and disbelief. I'm not telling you this to suggest that any of you have secret pasts or hidden capabilities. I'm telling you because my story illustrates something crucial about intelligence work. We make assumptions about what makes an effective operative. We value physical strength, emotional detachment, ruthless decision-making. But real operational success often comes from unexpected places. Volkov stood at the side of the hall, watching. Their relationship had evolved into something productive, though not exactly warm. He pushed her relentlessly in training, but now with genuine investment in her success rather than a desire to prove her inadequate. She'd passed every evaluation he'd administered, often using approaches that differed from standard doctrine but achieved the same objectives. The Academy is changing its training philosophy, Irene continued. We're learning that empathy isn't a weakness to be eliminated but a tool to be refined. That emotional intelligence can be as valuable as physical capability. That sometimes the best way to complete a mission is to care about the people affected by it. After the orientation, Irene met with her training team for a mission briefing. She'd been assigned to a real operation, her first since discovering her true identity. The mission involved extracting an intelligence asset from a hostile situation, precisely the kind of scenario where her unique combination of skills could be most valuable. Kozlov was part of her team now, along with 2 other Academy graduates who'd specifically requested to work with her. They'd become known as the Empathy Unit, a designation that started as mockery but had evolved into something they wore with pride. The target is an embedded operative in danger of being compromised, the briefing officer explained. Standard extraction protocols are complicated by the presence of civilian contacts the operative has developed. Traditional approach would be to extract the operative and abandon the civilians to whatever consequences follow. But we're not taking the traditional approach, Irene said, studying the mission files. The civilians represent both a complication and an opportunity. If we can extract them along with our operative, we eliminate potential intelligence leaks and demonstrate to our asset that we value the relationships they've formed. That builds trust and loyalty. It also increases mission complexity and risk, Volkov pointed out from his position as mission advisor. Everything worth doing involves risk, Irene replied. The question is whether the risk serves the larger objective. In this case, I believe it does. The mission launched at dusk, Irene's team moving with coordinated precision that came from months of integrated training. As they worked, Irene felt something click into place, a synthesis of her conscious abilities and recovered phantom skills. She moved through the operation with confidence that came not from suppressed programming but from genuine competence earned through training and choice. The extraction succeeded. Not only did they retrieve their operative, but they also secured the 3 civilian contacts whose information could have compromised multiple ongoing operations. As their transport lifted off from the extraction point, Irene looked back at the city lights below and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, certainty about who she was and what she was meant to do. Back at the Academy, Director Petrov met them on the landing pad. Exemplary work, all of you. Hill, your approach was unconventional but effective. You've proven Eva Brenner's theory. Empathy, properly applied, enhances operational capability rather than diminishing it. Irene thought about Eva Brenner, the woman who'd protected her, who'd given her the Phoenix marking as a promise that she'd never be forgotten. Eva hadn't lived to see her theory validated, but her legacy was alive in Irene's success. As she walked across the Academy grounds, Irene passed the spot where she'd done endless push-ups while Volkov watched with contempt. She remembered the girl she'd been then, desperate to prove herself, unaware of the capabilities hidden in her own mind. That girl and the child operative she'd been had merged into someone new, someone who embodied both strength and compassion, capability and caring. The phoenix on her neck had marked her as something from the past. But Irene Hill had become something entirely her own, an operative who succeeded not despite her emotions but because of them, who proved that the greatest strength wasn't in becoming unfeeling, but in caring deeply while remaining effective. She'd been cut down and marked as a failure, only to rise from those ashes as exactly what Eva Brenner had always believed she could be, someone who changed the rules about what an operative could be, simply by refusing to accept that caring made her weak. The instructor had cut her hair as punishment and found the secret ink that identified her as Phantom. But that discovery had given Irene something more valuable than any hidden identity, the chance to choose who she wanted to become, and the opportunity to prove that sometimes the most powerful operatives are the ones who never stop being human. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.